The Calcification, a novel, Chapter 1, the morning the sparrows turned to granite. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6:12 a.m. The bread rose in the ovens like small resurrections, each loaf a golden brown testament to the improbable alchemy of yeast, heat, and time. Neyo Blackstrap, that was actually his name, and yes, his parents had been hippies who'd met at a Brooks and Amp. Done concert in Winnipeg during what they referred to as their nomadic phase, stood with his flour-dusted hands resting on his hips, watching the sourdough achieve its destiny through the oven's glass door. Outside, Plumville stirred itself awake like a hungover insomniac who'd forgotten why they'd stayed up in the first place. It was a medium-sized town that felt more like an overgrown village, complete with narrow streets that wound like intestines through neighborhoods that never quite agreed on where one ended and another began. Some of these streets, particularly the ones on the eastern edge near the old tobacco district, had an almost English quality to them. Cramped, cobbled, shadowed by buildings that leaned toward each other like gossiping widows. "You're doing that thing again," said Mercer, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better decades, better centuries perhaps. The rag was less cloth than it was a philosophical meditation on decay. Mercer was Neyo's cousin, his co-worker, and his neighbor in the strange little compound at the far edge of the Hendrickson property, where Neyo and his wife Pletishiapa lived in a house so modest it apologized for existing. Mercer was a thick-shouldered man with a deviated septum that made him sound perpetually congested, as if he were always on the verge of a head cold that never quite arrived. His voice came out like someone talking through a wet towel stuffed inside a tuba. "What thing?" Neyo asked, though he knew. "That thing where you stare at the bread like it's going to tell you the meaning of life, or at least why your parents named you after an R&B singer who hadn't even been born yet when they picked it. Maybe it will. Bread's been doing that for thousands of years. The meaning thing, not the Neyo thing." Mercer snorted, which sounded like a small mammal dying inside a drainage pipe. "Your wife called. Said to pick up milk on the way home, the weird kind, the oat one that tastes like cardboard fucked a tree, and they had a baby that was somehow even more disappointed than both parents combined." Neyo smiled. That sounded like something Pletishiapa would want. She was a woman of particular taste, gentle, thoughtful, with a laugh that arrived late to jokes, like a guest who'd gotten lost on the way to the party and stopped to help an injured bird before finally showing up. They'd been married 3 years, and Neyo still discovered new things about her. The way she organized spices alphabetically but in reverse order because Zatar deserves to be first for once. Her inexplicable fear of ceiling fans. "They're just waiting," she'd say, looking up with genuine concern, waiting for the right moment. Her collection of vintage cherry pie tins that lined the kitchen windowsill like small aluminum monuments to an America that had either never existed or had existed too much. The bell above the bakery door chimed, and in walked Ruth, one of their regulars. She was 70-something, with hair the color of pewter and an expression that suggested she'd just bitten into something sour not recently, but decades ago, and she'd simply decided to keep making that face out of principle. She came in every Tuesday and Friday, bought a single croissant, and complained about its texture with the passion of a French aristocrat facing the guillotine. "Morning, Ruth," Neyo said. "Is it?" She peered at the display case like it had personally offended her ancestors. "These look dry. They're not dry. They look dry. I can see it from here. That's how dry they look." "Ruth, they came out of the oven 45 minutes ago. 45 minutes is a lifetime in croissant years," she said with the certainty of someone who'd done extensive research. "That's like being 80 in dog years. Then don't buy one." "I didn't say I wouldn't buy one. I said they look dry. There's a difference. One is a transaction. The other is a philosophical observation about the nature of baked goods in late capitalism." This was their dance. Neyo bagged a croissant, the third one, from the left, because Ruth believed in patterns and Ruth paid in exact change, which she'd had prepared in a small leather coin purse that looked like something a Victorian child would have been beaten with. She left with a grunt that might have been satisfaction or indigestion or a complex emotional state that encompassed both. When the door closed, Mercer laughed so hard his deviated septum whistled like a kettle with emphysema. I love that woman. You love everyone. No, I love her specifically. She's like if disappointment became sentient and learned to walk and then took a community college course on passive aggression. He paused, considering. Actually, you know who she reminds me of? That character from the musical Annie. Not Annie herself, obviously, Miss Hannigan, but like if Miss Hannigan had given up drinking and replaced it with judging pastries. You've been thinking about Annie a lot lately, Neyo observed. Mercer's face did something complicated. Yeah, I have this whole thing with that musical. It excites me and also makes me feel strange. Strange how? I don't know. Like, it's this story about an orphan finding hope and family, right? Which should be uplifting, but then I think about all those other orphans who didn't get adopted by Daddy Warbucks. They're still in that orphanage with Miss Hannigan, eating gruel or whatever, while Annie's off living in a mansion, and the musical just ends. It's like, congratulations, Annie, you won the lottery. Fuck everyone else. There's something almost obscene about it. This one kid gets saved and we're supposed to feel good. But really, it just highlights how arbitrary and cruel the whole system is. And then they sing tomorrow, and I'm supposed to feel hopeful. I feel complicit. I feel like I've participated in some kind of capitalist fairy tale that's basically economic inequality set to music. Neyo stared at his cousin. You need therapy. I'm in therapy. We've spent 4 sessions on Annie. My therapist thinks I'm projecting. Are you? Probably, but that doesn't make me wrong about the musical. The day proceeded with the rhythm of all bakery days. Customers, dough, heat, the smell of yeast and butter creating an atmosphere that was either comforting or nauseating depending on your relationship with carbohydrates and your feelings about mortality. Around noon, a woman came in who Neyo had never seen before. She was tall, angular, with the kind of severe beauty that made you think of broken glass arranged into sculpture. "Do you have anything gluten-free?" she asked. "Ma'am, this is a bakery. So that's a no?" "That's a what the fuck are you talking about?" She left without buying anything, and Mercer leaned over. "That was Table." "Table?" "Yeah! That's what everyone calls her. Don't know her real name. She lives in that weird building near the grain silo, you know. The one with all the windows painted black." "Why do they call her Table?" Mercer shrugged, his deviated septum producing a sound like wind through a haunted canyon. "No idea, but she's been asking weird questions all over town about the memories, the shared thing." "Ah, yes. The memories. About half of Plumville's residents had started experiencing them 3 weeks ago, vivid, inexplicable recollections of an event that no one could describe but everyone claimed to remember. Some people said it involved a sound, others said it was a smell. A few insisted it was a physical sensation, like falling while standing still. The local paper had run a story about it, suggesting mass hysteria or contaminated water. But that didn't explain why only certain people were affected, or why the memories felt so real, so textured, so heavy. "You have them?" Neyo asked. "The memories? No. You? No. Pletishiapa doesn't either, which is weird, right? It seems almost random." "Nothing in this town is random," Mercer said, and there was something in his voice that made Neyo look up sharply. But Mercer was already turning away, wiping down the counter again with that archaeological rag. At 2:47 p.m. Bobby came in. Bobby was a regular mid-40s, with the haunted eyes of a man who'd seen the inside of too many therapy offices. and had started to suspect that the problem wasn't him, but rather some fundamental defect in the architecture of reality itself. He worked as an insurance adjuster, which meant he spent his days quantifying other people's suffering into dollar amounts, a job that would have broken most people but seemed to suit Bobby's particular brand of existential numbness. Coffee. Black. And one of those muffins that looks like it might actually be a failed attempt at something else. The Bran? Is that what that is? I thought it was an art installation about disappointment. Neyo bagged a muffin. Bobby paid, then paused, looking at Neyo with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual and failing spectacularly. You heard about what they found down at the old grain silo? No. What? Strawberries. Neyo waited for more. Bobby seemed to think that single word was sufficient explanation. Strawberries, Neyo repeated. Yeah! Thousands of them, just filling up one of the silo chambers fresh, like someone had just dumped them there. But the silo's been abandoned for 20 years. That's weird. That's extremely weird. But here's the weirder part. People are taking them, like pillaging them. That's the word everyone's using. Pillaging. They need them. Don't know why. Can't explain it. They just need strawberries all of a sudden, like it's some kind of compulsion. Mercer had stopped wiping the counter and was listening now, his face doing that thing where it looked like he was trying to solve a math problem written in a language he didn't speak. Who's taking them? Mercer asked. Bobby shrugged. All the people with the memories. Every single one of them. They show up at the silo with bags, boxes, whatever they can carry, fill them up with strawberries, take them home. Some people are eating them. Some people are just keeping them, hoarding them. Neyo felt something cold move through his chest, like a draft from a door he didn't know was open. That's connected. It has to be. Obviously, Bobby said. But nobody's doing anything about it. Police won't touch it. Media won't cover it. Why not? Bobby's laugh was bitter, like coffee left on the burner too long. Because of the Plumville Accord. The Plumville Accord. Neyo had heard of it. Everyone in town had, but it was one of those things nobody really talked about, like an embarrassing relative or a collective trauma bond. It had been established in 1887 after what the history books carefully referred to as the October Incident, and it stipulated that certain events occurring within Plumville's borders were not to be reported, investigated, or acknowledged by official channels. The exact parameters were vague, but the effect was clear. Weird shit happened, and everyone just dealt with it privately. So we're just supposed to ignore mass strawberry theft. We're supposed to ignore everything. That's the whole point. Bobby picked up his coffee and muffin. Anyway, thought you should know, in case you start craving strawberries. He left, and the bell chimed behind him with a sound that felt accusatory. At 3 p.m. Neyo took his break and stepped into the alley behind the shop. This was where the day would fracture, where reality would show its first crack, though Neyo didn't know that yet. The alley smelled like garbage trucks and regret, with a faint undernote of something sweet that didn't belong. Strawberries, maybe, though that might have been suggestion. That's when he saw the sparrow. It sat on the dumpster's edge, perfectly still, too still. Neyo approached, thinking it might be dead, but when he got close enough to touch it, he understood that death would have been kinder, would have made more sense, would have existed within the parameters of a universe that followed its own rules. The bird had turned to stone, not metaphorically, not symbolically, not in any way that could be dismissed or explained or rationalized. Literally, its feathers were granite. Each one individually rendered in stone with impossible detail. Its tiny clawed feet were marble, veined with minerals that caught the light. Its eyes were two chips of obsidian, black and depthless, staring into a forever it would never reach. What the fuck? Neyo whispered to no one, to the alley, to God if he was listening. Which seemed unlikely given the circumstances. He touched it, cold, solid, impossible. The weight was wrong, too heavy for a sparrow, too real for a hallucination. He looked around the alley, half expecting to see someone with a camera. waiting to shout that he'd been pranked, that this was some elaborate art project, some Marcel Duchamp-inspired piece of bullshit meant to challenge perceptions about the nature of reality and representation. But there was only the dumpster, the brick walls, and further down the alley, maybe 50 yards, the small bar called the Interim. It was a place wedged into the alley like a secret, like something that had grown there naturally rather than being built. People went there to drink problems they couldn't name, to sit in the dark and pretend that darkness was a choice rather than a condition. Neyo picked up the stone sparrow, cradling it like an infant, like evidence, like proof of something he couldn't articulate. It weighed more than it should have. He carried it back inside, where Mercer was arguing with a customer about whether sourdough was supposed to be sour. "Mercer," Neyo said, "look at this." Mercer looked. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, then a kind of pale horror that settled in his cheeks like frostbite. "Is that... yeah? Is it... yeah? How? I don't know." They stood there, two men in aprons dusted with flour, holding a calcified bird like it was a bomb they didn't know how to defuse. The customer who'd been arguing about sourdough looked at the bird, looked at them, and quietly left without buying anything. "We should tell someone," Mercer said. "Who? Animal control?" "Hello, officer. We found a bird that violates the laws of physics, chemistry, and possibly theology. Maybe it's a prank. Some art school kid doing a Duchamp thing. You know, like that urinal he called a fountain. This is... a bird he's calling a bird. That's stupid. Art is stupid. Modern art especially. It's all just people making shit and then telling you you're too dumb to get it. Like, no, I get it. You glued a banana to a wall. Congratulations. You've discovered that people will call anything art if you put it in a gallery and charge enough money. Neyo set the sparrow on the counter. It looked accusatory, as if blaming them for its condition, for their failure to understand, for the mere fact of their existence in a world where such transformations were possible. At 5 p.m. they closed the bakery. Neyo wrapped the stone sparrow in newspaper the Plumville Gazette, which ironically was not reporting on any of the weird shit happening in town, and carried it to his truck, a 1987 Ford Ranger that ran on what Pletishiapa called spite and mechanical Stockholm syndrome. The drive home took him past the eastern edge of town, where the streets narrowed into those English-feeling corridors lined with row houses that looked like they'd been imported from Lancashire and dropped into the middle of nowhere. Fall leaves were scattered everywhere, but they weren't turning the usual colours. Instead of red and orange and yellow, they were golden brown, exactly golden brown, all of them, as if someone had decided on a single shade and enforced it with bureaucratic precision. It reminded Neyo of something, a story his grandmother had told him about Plumville's history, back in 1923, when the trees had started developing strange growths on their branches. Not growths exactly, more like protrusions. Shapes. Faces, some people said, though others insisted they were symbols, runes, messages from something that didn't have a language humans could properly interpret. The whole town had nearly panicked before the October incident protocol kicked in and everyone just stopped talking about it. The faces eventually went away. Or maybe they were still there and people had just learned not to see them. Neyo pulled into the compound, that's what they called it, though it was really just a cluster of 4 small houses arranged around a shared courtyard at the edge of the Hendrickson property. He and Pletishiapa lived in the smallest one. Mercer lived next door. The other 2 houses were occupied by people Neyo barely knew, an older woman named Gladys who collected porcelain cats, and a man named Spencer who worked nights at the hospital and kept to himself in a way that suggested he had secrets but wasn't particularly interested in sharing them. Pletishiapa was in the backyard with Gizzard, their pet. Calling Gizzard a pet was generous. He was part dog, part bird, part ferret, with the loyalty of the first, the appetite of the second, and the smell of the third multiplied by whatever unholy mathematics governed hybrid animals. He had feathers on his tail that molted seasonally, paws that clicked when he walked on hardwood, and a bark that sounded like a clarinet being murdered by a slightly larger clarinet. "Hey, love," Pletishiapa said, looking up from where she was throwing a ball that Gizzard was ignoring in favor of eating grass. "You look weird." "Weird how? Like you saw a ghost, but the ghost was boring, so now you're disappointed in the whole concept of ghosts." Neyo kissed her forehead. She smelled like lavender and the faint chemical tang of the art supplies she used for her hobby, painting miniature scenes of domestic violence on thimbles. Not domestic violence as in abuse, domestic violence as in furniture fighting, chairs attacking tables, lamps strangling curtains. It was unsettling work. But she sold them on Etsy for surprising amounts of money to people who apparently had very specific decorating needs. "I found something today," he said. "Dead? Worse. Turned to stone." She studied his face for signs of a joke. Finding none, she frowned. "Like, metaphorically, like your heart turned to stone because I forgot to pick up the oat milk? I got the oat milk, and no, literally, a sparrow, granite feathers, marble feet. The whole deal. That's impossible. I know. Did you bring it home? It's in the truck." She threw the ball again. Gizzard watched it bounce away, then looked at her like she'd personally betrayed him and possibly his entire evolutionary lineage. "Show me." They went to the truck. Neyo unwrapped the sparrow. Pletishiapa stood there for a long moment, her face doing that thing where it looked like her brain was trying to process information that didn't fit into any existing category. "Fuck," she said quietly. "Yeah. This is connected to the memories, to the strawberries." "Strawberries?" Neyo told her what Bobby had said. As he spoke, Pletishiapa's face got progressively paler, like someone was slowly draining, the blood from her head through an invisible straw. "We need to leave," she said when he finished. "What?" "Plumville. We need to leave. Pack up Gizzard, get in the truck, and just drive until we hit a town where the laws of physics still apply. We can't just leave." "Why not?" "Because—" Neyo paused, trying to articulate something he didn't fully understand. "Because if we leave now, we'll spend the rest of our lives wondering what happened, what this was. And it'll eat at us. It'll become the thing we don't talk about at dinner parties. We don't go to dinner parties. You know what I mean." Pletishiapa was quiet for a long time, looking at the stone sparrow. Finally she sighed. "Okay, but if things get weirder, we're leaving. I don't care if it means spending the rest of my life wondering. I'd rather wander from a safe distance. Deal." That night, neither of them could sleep. They lay in bed listening to Gizzard's snorer sound like a swamp plane crash-landing into a pile of chronicas and thought about stone birds and phantom memories and strawberries appearing in abandoned silos. Around 2 a.m., Neyo got up. He pulled on a robe and stepped onto the porch. The night was quiet, except for the distant sound of someone's television playing the Jackson 5. "I Want You Back" drifted through the dark like a ghost of better times. Like a reminder that the world had once been simple enough for songs about heartbreak and reconciliation. Down the street he could see lights on in the house where the 4 Talbot brothers lived. The house was a strange, angular thing that looked like it had been designed by an architect who'd been recently diagnosed with a brain tumor and had decided to work through it via spite. People didn't talk about the Talbots much, but when they did, it was with the kind of careful language reserved for topics that might explode if handled wrong. One of them was standing in the yard now, shirtless despite the cold, staring at the sky. From this distance, Neyo couldn't tell which brother it was. They all had the same sharp jawline, the same intense eyes, the same way of moving that suggested they were constantly aware of their bodies in space, like dancers or serial killers. Neyo watched him for a long time, and the brother never moved, never blinked, just stood there like a piece of furniture someone had forgotten to bring inside. Finally, Neyo went back to bed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, he lay there and thought about the Plumville Accord, about what had happened in October 1887 that was bad enough to require a permanent gag order enforced by some kind of collective agreement that superseded law, media, and apparently common sense. What had happened in October 1887? And more importantly, was it happening again? The next morning, Neyo woke to the smell of something burning. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Pletishiapa standing at the stove, staring at a pan of what had once been eggs and were now approaching the consistency of industrial rubber. "I can't cook when I'm thinking," she said by way of explanation. "What are you thinking about?" "Table, the woman from the bakery, yeah. I've been asking around about her. Turns out she's some kind of local trans activist. Been trying to get information about the memories, the strawberries, all of it. She thinks there's a conspiracy. Isn't there always? No, I mean a real one. She thinks someone in town is doing this deliberately, orchestrating it, but she can't get close enough to prove anything because—" Pletishiapa paused, scraping the eggs into the trash. "Because of the Accord. Anyone who tries to investigate too hard gets shut down. Not violently, just socially. You become persona non grata. People stop talking to you. Businesses won't serve you. You're erased without technically being erased." "Jesus." "Yeah, but Table's persistent. She keeps pushing. And yesterday—" Pletishiapa hesitated. "Yesterday she apparently fell down a hole." "What kind of hole?" "A big one. Square, at the grain silo. She was trying to get inside to see the strawberries, and she fell through something. A trap. A structural collapse. No one knows. But she's missing now. Been missing since yesterday afternoon." Neyo felt his stomach drop. "Has anyone reported it?" "To who? The police who won't investigate? The media that won't report?" They stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burnt eggs and the quiet hum of appliances, and realized they were trapped in a town that had rules specifically designed to prevent anyone from asking questions. "We should go to the silo," Neyo said. "That's a terrible idea." "I know. When?" "Tonight, after work. We'll bring Mercer." Pletishiapa nodded slowly. "Okay, but we're bringing Gizzard too. If things get weird, at least we'll have a—" She paused, looking at Gizzard, who was currently trying to eat his own tail. "Actually, I don't know what Gizzard would do. Probably make things worse. But we're bringing him anyway. The day at the bakery was slower than usual. Only a handful of customers came in, and all of them had the same distracted, haunted quality-like people who just remembered something they'd spent years trying to forget. Ruth came in at her usual time but didn't complain about the croissants. She just bought one, paid, and left without a word. It was deeply unsettling. Around 3 p.m., a man came in that Neyo had never seen before. He was tall, gaunt, with skin that looked like it had been stretched too tightly over his bones. He wore a suit that was expensive but somehow wrung the fabric too smooth, the cut too perfect, like something designed by an AI that had learned about clothing from photographs but had never actually seen a human wear it. There was something about him that made Neyo think of those old conspiracy theories about leather-skinned suits, not that this man was wearing one, but rather that he looked like someone who might have strong opinions about their consumer applications. "Can I help you?" Neyo asked. The man smiled and his teeth were too white, too uniform. "I'm looking for Table. She's not here." "I know. I'm asking if you've seen her. Heard anything about her whereabouts?" "Who are you?" The man's smile widened. "Someone who's concerned about her well-being. She's been asking questions. Dangerous questions. The kind that get people hurt." "Is that a threat?" "It's a statement of fact. Plumville has rules. People who break those rules tend to disappear. Not violently, just they're gone. And everyone's better for it." He pulled a card from his pocket and set it on the counter. "If you hear anything, call me." He left before Neyo could respond. Mercer came out from the back where he'd been listening. That was fucked up, Mercer said. Yeah. We're still going to the silo tonight, right? Yeah. Good. Because I'm starting to think Table's onto something, and whatever it is, it's big enough that people with expensive suits and scary teeth are trying to keep it quiet. That evening, after closing, Neyo and Mercer drove to the compound to pick up Pletishiapa and Gizzard. The sun was setting, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise purple and yellow and somehow angry. Pletishiapa was waiting on the porch, wearing what she called her investigation outfit, black jeans, black hoodie, and boots that looked like they could kick through a door if necessary. Gizzard was on a leash, which was optimistic considering Gizzard's general indifference to the concept of obedience. "Ready?" Neyo asked. "No, but let's go anyway." They piled into Mercer's car, a 1992 Honda Civic that ran on what Mercer called pure fucking willpower and a prayer to whatever God handles automobiles, and drove toward the grain silo. The silo sat on the eastern edge of town, past the English-feeling streets, past the last of the residential areas, in a zone that felt abandoned by intention rather than neglect. The building was massive, cylindrical, covered in rust and graffiti that ranged from artistic to obscene to utterly incomprehensible symbols that might have been gang tags or might have been attempts to communicate with entities that existed outside conventional understanding. They parked about 100 yards away and approached on foot. The air smelled wrong-sweet and rotten at the same time, like fruit left too long in the sun. "Strawberries," Pletishiapa whispered. The smell was overwhelming as they got closer. It wasn't pleasant, it was too much, too concentrated, like standing inside a jar of preserves. The entrance to the silo was a large metal door that had been pried open, probably by the people who'd been pillaging the strawberries. Neyo pulled it wider, and they stepped inside. Darkness, complete and total. Mercer turned on a flashlight he'd had the foresight to bring one on. The beam cut through the black like a knife through extremely thick, somewhat hostile darkness. And there they were, strawberries. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, maybe more. They filled the floor of the silo to a depth of several feet, a sea of red fruit that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, and yet very clearly did exist because they were standing in it. "Holy fuck," Mercer said, and his deviated septum made it sound like a prayer. Gizzard immediately started eating them, which seemed both inevitable and somehow appropriate. "Where did they come from?" Pletishiapa asked. "I don't know, but look." Neyo pointed to the far wall where Mercer's flashlight had caught something. A hole. Square. Big enough for a person to fall through. They waded through the strawberries toward it. The fruit squished under their feet, releasing juice that stained their shoes red. The hole was in the floor, cut with geometric precision. Mercer shone the light down into it. It descended maybe 20 feet before opening into what looked like a chamber. And the chamber wasn't filled with grain or strawberries. It was filled with a liquid, thick, viscous. The color was impossible to determine in the flashlight beam, but it seemed to shift black, then purple, then something that wasn't quite a color at all, and floating in it face down was Table, or at least it looked like Table. Same angular build, same severe haircut, but she wasn't moving. And the liquid around her was doing something, pulsing maybe, or breathing if liquid could breathe. "We have to get her out," Pletishiapa said. "How?" Mercer asked. "That's a 20-foot drop into unknown liquid. We don't have rope, we don't have equipment, we don't even know if she's..." Table moved, just slightly, a twitch. Or maybe the liquid moved her. It was impossible to tell. And then she turned over, slowly, deliberately, like someone waking from sleep. Her eyes opened. They were black, completely black. No whites, no iris. Just black, reflecting the flashlight beam like polished stone. She looked up at them and smiled, and the liquid began to rise. End of Chapter 1, Chapter 2, The Hare in the Trees, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. 2 Corinthians 11:14-15, the liquid rose like it had a purpose, like it knew something they didn't, like it was late for an appointment it had no intention of missing. Neyo grabbed Pletishiapa's arm and yanked her back from the edge of the hole just as a tendril of the viscous substance reached up, questing, searching, almost playful in its malevolence. "Run!" Mercer screamed, which was redundant because they were already running, stumbling through strawberries that had somehow become treacherous, their feet slipping on crushed fruit that released a smell so sweet it was nauseating. Gizzard, for once in his hybrid life, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and bounded ahead of them, his feathered tail streaming behind him like a flag from a country that had been dissolved for war crimes. They burst through the silo door into the night air, gasping, and didn't stop running until they'd reached Mercer's Honda Civic. Mercer's hands shook so badly he dropped the keys twice before managing to unlock the door. "What the hell was that?" Pletishiapa demanded once they were inside, doors locked, as if locks would do anything against whatever they'd just witnessed. "I don't know," Neyo said, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to file a noise complaint. "But table her eyes, those weren't eyes." Mercer interrupted, his deviated septum making him sound like he was speaking through a haunted kazoo. "Those were holes! Holes that went somewhere else." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Gizzard's panting and the distant hum of Plumville at night to town. That was pretending everything was normal while reality slowly came apart at the seams. Neyo's phone rang, shattering the quiet. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello?" Static. Then a voice female, distorted, like someone speaking through water or time or both. "You saw her. Who is this?" "You saw her, and now you're part of it. The fruit, the memories, the calcification. It's all connected. It's all the same thing. Connected to what? To what we did, what we've always done, what we have to keep doing, or everything ends." A pause, filled with breathing that sounded wrong, too wet, too deliberate. "Don't tell anyone what you saw. The accord exists for a reason. The government can't know. If they find out about the substance, about what it does, about what we've been using it for." The line went dead. Neyo stared at his phone. It was a cheap $50 burner he'd bought at a gas station 3 years ago and had never bothered to replace because it worked, and he wasn't the kind of person who needed the latest technology to feel alive. "What did they say?" Pletishiapa asked. Neyo told them. As he spoke, Mercer's face went through several expressions, finally settling on a kind of resigned horror. "We need to talk to Spencer." "Spencer? The neighbor who barely speaks?" "Yeah. Because I think Spencer knows more about this than he's letting on. I've seen him coming back from the silo at weird hours. And last week I saw him carrying something, a container, like a jug filled with that same liquid." They drove back to the compound in silence. The streets were empty except for a black cat that watched them pass with eyes that reflected the headlights in a way that suggested it was judging them and finding them wanting. When they pulled up, Spencer was sitting on his porch, waiting, like he'd known they were coming. He was a thin man in his mid-50s with naturally curly hair that he'd given up trying to manage, and a face that looked like it had seen things it wished it could unsee but had resigned itself to carrying the burden. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and on the table next to him sat a water bong that definitely wasn't for tobacco. "You went to the silo," Spencer said. "It wasn't a question." "Yeah," Neyo said, getting out of the car. Pletishiapa and Mercer followed, with Gizzard bringing up the rear. "And you saw Table?" "Yeah. And now you want answers." Spencer took a long drag from the water bong, held it, exhaled slowly. "Come inside, but leave the dog-bird ferret thing outside. This conversation is already going to be weird enough without adding him to the mix." They tied Gizzard to the porch railing optimistically, given his track record, and followed Spencer inside. The interior of Spencer's house was a revelation. The living room was decorated in a color scheme that could only be described as aggressively deliberate. Beige walls, dark brown furniture, and chartreuse accents that seemed to vibrate with their own frequency. It was the kind of room that made you feel like you'd stepped into a 1970s fever dream directed by someone who'd taken just slightly too much LSD and decided that interior design was the perfect medium for expressing their newfound understanding of the universe. "Jesus Christ," Pletishiapa whispered, looking around. "I know," Spencer said. "The previous owner did it. I haven't had the energy to redecorate. Plus, it's grown on me. There's something honest about a room that refuses to apologize for being ugly." He gestured for them to sit. They did, sinking into a couch that was either extremely comfortable or trying to eat the mitt was hard to tell. On the wall was a piece of stained glass that had clearly been broken and poorly repaired, creating a fragmented image of what might have been a saint or might have been a very disappointed grocery clerk. Near the window sat a waterbed that looked like it had been imported from 1983 and was refusing to acknowledge that subsequent decades had happened. "The substance in the silo," Spencer began, "isn't from here. Not from Plumville, not from this state, not from anywhere you'd find on a map. It's older than maps. Older than the concept of maps." "Where did it come from?" Mercer asked. Spencer pulled out a cigarette, not a vape. An actual cigarette, which seemed almost quaint, and lit it. "That's the wrong question. The right question is, what does it want?" "Substances don't want things," Neyo said. "This one does. It wants to grow, to spread, to transform. That's what the strawberries are about. That's what the memories are about. That's what happened to Table." He took a drag, exhaled smoke that seemed to hang in the air longer than smoke should. "And that's what the trees are about." "The trees? You haven't noticed? The hair?" They stared at him. "Go look," Spencer said. "Go look at the trees outside." They went to the window. At first, Neyo didn't see anything unusual. Then Pletishiapa pointed. "There! On that oak." Neyo looked. Growing from the branches, swaying in the breeze, was hair, human hair, long, dark. Lustrous human hair growing directly from the bark like the tree had decided it wanted to be in a shampoo commercial. "What the hell?" Neyo said, which was becoming his catchphrase. "It started yesterday," Spencer said behind them. "Just a few trees at first. Now it's spreading. By tomorrow it'll be half the trees in town. By next week all of them. And it's not just hair." As if on cue, one of the trees maple near the fence opened what could only be described as a mouth. A small, perfectly formed human mouth that appeared in the trunk like a wound that had healed wrong. And it whistled. A single, clear note that carried through the night like a question no one wanted to answer. "Jesus!" Mercer breathed. "Jesus isn't here," Spencer said. "I don't think Jesus has been here for a very long time." They returned to the living room, each processing what they'd just seen in their own way. Pletishiapa sat down heavily, her face pale. Mercer paced, his deviated septum producing anxious whistles. Neyo stood by the window, unable to look away from the hair trees. "Why can't the government know?" Neyo asked finally. Spencer stubbed out his cigarette in an ashtray shaped like Elvis's head. "Because the substance is power, real power, the kind that could change everything, cure diseases, extend life, enhance abilities, but it costs something. It always costs something, and what it costs is complicated." "What does it cost?" "Souls," Spencer said flatly. "Not all at once, not obviously, but slowly, piece by piece, it hollows you out and fills the empty space with itself. The people taking the strawberries. They're not eating them because they're hungry. They're eating them because the substance is calling them. Converting them. Making them into vessels." "Vessels for what? For whatever comes next?" Spencer stood, walked to an ornate dining room. Table that seemed wildly out of place in the Bejan chartreuse nightmare of the living room. The table was a massive thing, dark wood carved with intricate patterns that looked vaguely ecclesiastical. On it sat a small, detailed model, a perfect recreation of Elvis Presley's Graceland mansion, complete with tiny rooms. "See this? I built it. Took me 3 years. Every room perfect. The jungle room, the music room, the TV room where Elvis watched 3 televisions at once, the racquetball building, the trophy building, the meditation garden where he's buried. Every detail exact. You know why? They shook their heads. Because precision matters. Because when you're building something, you have to know every room, every corner, every detail. You have to understand the whole structure before you can understand what it's for. He looked up at them. Plumville is like this mansion. It looks normal from the outside, but inside there are rooms most people never see, rooms where things happen that the Accord was designed to hide, and the substance is what powers those rooms. You're talking about a conspiracy, Pletishiapa said. I'm talking about a system, Spencer corrected. A system that's been running since 1887, since the October incident. You want to know what happened in October 1887? Yes, Neyo said. They found the substance. A group of bricklayers working on the new courthouse dug too deep and broke through into a chamber that shouldn't have existed. And inside that chamber was a pool of the liquid. They touched it, tasted it, and they changed, became something else, something that could see things, do things, understand things that normal humans couldn't. And they liked it. So they made a deal with whatever lived in that substance. They would feed it, protect it, help it spread, and in return it would give them power. That's insane, Mercer said. That's Plumville, Spencer replied, and I should know. I'm part of it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Neyo felt something cold settle in his stomach. What do you mean? Pletishiapa asked quietly. Spencer rolled up his sleeve. His arm was covered in symbols, not tattoos, but marks that looked like they'd been burned or carved into the skin. I'm a keeper, one of 12. We manage the substance. We perform the rituals. We make sure it stays hidden and controlled, or at least we did. Until recently. What changed? The substance is getting stronger, more active. It's not content to sit in the silo anymore. It wants out. It wants to spread. And some of the other keepers, they think that's a good thing. They think if they can channel its power, distribute it, they can achieve something greater. He looked at them with eyes that held genuine fear. They're wrong. If the substance gets out, if it spreads beyond Plumville, it won't stop. It'll keep going until there's nothing left but vessels and trees with mouths and memories that don't belong to anyone. And if you tried to tell someone, the government, scientists, then they'd come. They'd study it, try to weaponize it, use it, and that would accelerate everything. The substance feeds on attention, on interference. The Accord keeps it contained by keeping it secret. It's not a perfect system, but it's the only one we have. Neyo's phone rang again. He looked at it. Pletishiapa's mother, he answered. The sound that came through the speaker was inhuman, a wail of such pure, visceral grief that it bypassed all rational thought and went straight to some primal part of his brain that understood only that something terrible had happened. Pletishiapa snatched the phone. Mum, what's wrong? Her mother's voice was broken, fragmented, barely comprehensible through the sobs. You're your father, he ate the strawberries, he won't stop his eyes, oh God, his eyes. The phone clattered from Pletishiapa's hands. She stared at nothing, her face a mask of horror, and then she burst into tears, not gentle crying, but great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Neyo grabbed her, held her, felt utterly helpless. Mercer picked up the phone. Hello, Mrs. Chen. He listened for a moment, his face going pale. Okay, we're coming. Stay there, lock the doors. Don't let him near you if he's changed. He hung up. We have to go, Mercer said. Now. Wait, Spencer said. He went to a cabinet and pulled out 3 small vials filled with a clear liquid. Take these. If someone's been compromised by the substance, this will temporarily neutralize it. Temporarily. You put 3 drops in their mouth and it breaks the connection for about an hour. That's all I can give you. Neyo took the vials. They felt warm, almost alive. Why are you helping us? Because I'm tired, Spencer said simply. I'm tired of the rituals and the secrets and the lies. I'm tired of watching people turn into things. And because, he hesitated, because you might be able to stop this. If you're smart, if you're lucky, if you're willing to do things that will haunt you forever. They left Spencer standing in his Bejan chartreuse nightmare, drove to Pletishiapa's parents' house on the other side of town. The streets were different now Neyo could see it. The trees all had hair, long strands that moved in wind that wasn't blowing, and some of them had mouths that whistled as they passed, creating a discordant symphony that sounded like a funeral march played backwards. Pletishiapa's parents lived in a modest ranch house with a well-maintained lawn and a garden that her mother tended with religious devotion. When they pulled up, Mrs. Chen was standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "He's in the basement," she said. "He locked himself down there, said he didn't want to hurt me, said he could feel it changing him. They went inside. The house smelled like jasmine and fear. On the coffee table sat a bowl of watercress salad that no one had touched and a container of what looked like Watergate salad, that bizarre pistachio marshmallow concoction that had been popular in the 70s and refused to die. Mr. Chen had always been a quiet man, an accountant who collected coonskin caps for reasons no one fully understood, and had a nose that his wife lovingly described as characterful and everyone else described as unfortunately prominent. He was also one of those people who, when meeting anyone named Brian, would inevitably ask, "Is that spelled with an I or a Y?" As if it mattered, as if the spelling of Brian determined something fundamental about a person's character. Neyo had once known a kid named Brian spelled B-R-I-N, the normal way who'd developed a complex about this question. Every time someone asked, Brian would flinch slightly, as if the query itself was a small violence. By the time Brian was 12, he'd started telling people his name was Steve, just to avoid the conversation. The last Neyo had heard, Brian, our Steve, had moved to Wisconsin and become a therapist who specialized in helping people with name-related trauma, which seemed both appropriate and deeply sad. The basement door was locked from the inside. Neyo knocked. "Mr. Chen, it's Neyo. We're here to help." Silence. "Then you can't help. No one can help. It's inside me. It knows things. It shows me things. What does it show you?" "The end, the real end, not death transformation, everything becoming vessels, everything serving the source. It's beautiful and horrible, and I can't fight it much longer. Mr. Chen, I have something that can help, just for a little while. Can you unlock the door?" A long pause. Then the sound of a lock clicking. The door opened. Mr. Chen looked almost normal except for his eyes. They weren't fully black like tables had been, but they were changing, the irises spreading, darkening, consuming the whites like ink dropped in water. Neyo held up the vial. 3 drops. It'll break the connection." Mr. Chen opened his mouth. Neyo administered the drops. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Mr. Chen gasped, staggered, and his eyes cleared, not completely, but enough that he looked human again. "Thank you," he breathed. "Oh, God, thank you. I could feel it, in my head, in my bones, whispering, promising. Promising what?" Mercer asked. "Everything. Power, knowledge, eternal life. All I had to do was accept it, let it in fully, become a vessel." He looked at his wife, tears streaming down his face. "I almost did. I wanted to. It felt so good." Mrs. Chen hugged him, sobbing. Neyo felt his own phone vibrate, a text from an unknown number. "You can't save them all. The fruit is everywhere now. The transformation has begun. Join us or watch everyone you love become something else." He showed it to Mercer, who cursed quietly. Pletishiapa was holding her father, whispering to him in Mandarin, words of comfort that seemed inadequate against the reality they were facing. Neyo's phone rang again. "Different number," he answered. "Hello?" "Neyo! Oh my God, Neyo!" It was his sister, calling from Nevada. "You'll never believe it, I got the job, the one I interviewed for last month. They called me today and I start next week, and the salary is twice what I'm making now, and they're even covering relocation costs and da." she continued, breathless with joy, and Neyo felt something break inside him. Here was his sister, experiencing a moment of pure happiness, completely unaware that reality was coming apart in his town, that people were turning into vessels for something ancient and hungry. "That's amazing," he managed. "I'm so proud of you. Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, just tired. Listen, I have to go, but congratulations. Really, you deserve this." He hung up, and the contrast between her joy and his situation felt like a physical weight pressing on his chest. Mercer's phone rang. He looked at it, confused. "It's my dentist." "Why would my dentist be calling at 9 p.m.? He answered. "Hello? Yes, this is what? I'm sorry, you're saying what now?" His face went through a complicated series of expressions. "That's the most baffling thing I've ever heard. No, I don't want to schedule a teeth whitening session at midnight in exchange for chopsticks. Why would you even you know what? I'm hanging up now." He did, looking bewildered. That was surreal even by today's standards. Pletishiapa's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her eyes went wide. "You're kidding! You have to be kidding!" She listened more. That's astonishing. I'll be there as soon as I can." She hung up, looking dazed. "That was the Etsy marketplace. Apparently someone wants to commission 1,000 of my thimbles. 1,000. For some kind of art installation in New York featuring domestic furniture violence. They're offering $50,000. For a moment, the absurdity of receiving such incredible news in the middle of a supernatural crisis made Neyo want to laugh hysterically. Then his phone rang a 5th time. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. "Hello?" Static. Then a voice he recognized. Table, but wrong. Distorted, layered, like multiple people speaking at once. Neyo Blackstrap. Born April 3rd, 1998. Married to Pletishiapa Chen, December 15th, 2022. Works at Mercer's Bakery. Lives at 47 Hendrickson Compound. You have a dogbird ferret named Gizzard. You bought strawberries last week organic from the farmer's market, not from the silo. Smart, but it won't matter. Table? I was table. Now I'm something else, something better. And soon you will be too. All of you. The transformation is accelerating. By tomorrow night, half the town will be vessels. By next week, everyone. And there's nothing you can do to stop it because it's already inside you. What? You breathed the air at the silo. You touched the strawberries. You stood in the presence of the source. We're connected now, all of us. And when the ritual is complete, when the sun sets tomorrow night, you will understand. You'll feel it calling, and you'll answer. You won't be able to help yourself. The line went dead. Neyo stood there, phone in hand, feeling ice spread through his veins. He looked at Mercer, at Pletishiapa, at Mr. and Mrs. Chen. "We need to leave. All of us. Right now. We need to get as far from Plumville as possible before sunset tomorrow." "We can't," Pletishiapa said quietly. "What? Why?" "Because my father can't leave. The substance Spencer said the vial only works for an hour. After that, he'll start changing again. And if he's not in Plumville when it happens, if he's around normal people who don't understand," she trailed off. "So we stay," Mercer said. "We figure out how to stop this." "How?" Neyo demanded. "Spencer said Spencer is one of them," Mercer interrupted, and there was something in his voice that made Neyo stop. "He's a keeper. He performs the rituals. Maybe he's having second thoughts now, but he's been part of this for years. We can't trust him." "Then who do we trust?" Before anyone could answer, there was a crash from upstairs. They ran up to find the front door open and Gizzard gone. In his place was a note, written in handwriting that looked like it had been done by someone trying very hard to write neatly while their hands shook. "We have your animal. Come to the old courthouse at midnight if you want it back. Come alone. Come prepared to listen. There's still time to join us willingly." "The keepers." "Hell," Neyo said. "We're not going," Pletishiapa said. "It's obviously a trap. They have Gizzard. Gizzard is a dogbird ferret. We can get another one, probably." "We can't abandon him," Neyo said. And besides, if we go, maybe we can learn something. Figure out what they're planning. A sound from outside made them all freeze. Whistling, but not from one tree, from all of them. Every tree on the street, all whistling the same note, creating a harmony that was beautiful and terrible and completely wrong. Mrs. Chen started crying again. Mr. Chen held her, but his eyes were already starting to darken again. The vial's effect was wearing off. We need more of those vials, Pletishiapa said. Spencer said he only had 3. Then we need to find out how to make more. Or how to destroy the source. Or something. She looked at Neyo with fierce determination. We can't just give up. Neyo's phone buzzed. Another text, this time with an image attached. It was a photo of the old courthouse, taken from inside, and sitting in the center of the frame, looking confused but unharmed, was Gizzard. But behind him, barely visible in the shadows, were figures. 12 of them, standing in a circle. The text read, "Midnight. We'll explain everything. Bring the others. This is your one chance to understand, to choose. After tomorrow night there will be no more choices. Only transformation, only unity, only the source." Mercer's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went white. He hung up without saying anything. "What?" Neyo asked. "That was dispatch. I volunteer with the fire department sometimes. They just found a body, out past the eastern edge of town, near where the old bricklayer's housing used to be. And? It was mutilated. Not by an animal, by something else. Something that knew what it was doing, they said." He swallowed hard. "They said it looked like the person had been taken apart and put back together wrong. And the body was covered in strawberries, growing out of it, like the person had become a garden." The room was silent except for the whistling of the trees and Mrs. Chen's quiet sobbing. Finally, Pletishiapa spoke. "We go to the courthouse. All of us. We find out what they want, and then we decide." "Decide what?" Neyo asked. "Whether we fight or whether we run. But we decide together." They left Mr. and Mrs. Chen at the house with strict instructions to lock all the doors and windows. Mrs. Chen insisted on giving them sandwiches. "You can't face evil on an empty stomach," she said, which was probably the most practical advice anyone had given them all night. Mercer gave them his water bong. "It's calming," he said, which seemed wildly inappropriate but also somehow exactly right for the situation. As they drove toward the courthouse, Neyo noticed more changes. People walking the streets with dark eyes. Trees not just with hair and mouths, but with something else, patches of skin, smooth and pale, growing on the bark like tumors. And everywhere the smell of strawberries, sweet and cloying and wrong. The courthouse was a massive Victorian structure that had been built with materials that shouldn't have been structurally sound, but somehow were. It sat on a hill overlooking Plumville like a judgment waiting to be delivered. They parked and approached the front entrance. The doors were open. Inside, the building was lit by candles, hundreds of them creating shadows that moved with malicious intent. The walls were decorated with symbols similar to the ones on Spencer's arm, but larger, more intricate, painted in something that might have been paint but smelled like copper. And in the center of the main hall stood the 12 keepers. Spencer was among them, looking ashamed but resigned. The others were people Neyo recognized from around town. The librarian, the woman who ran the hardware store, Bobby the insurance adjuster, even Ruth, the croissant critic. "Ruth?" Neyo said, disbelieving. Ruth shrugged. "The croissants were never actually dry. I was checking your stress response. Keepers need to know who can handle pressure. You passed." "What the hell is happening?" Mercer demanded. "The tallest of the keepers, a man Neyo didn't recognize, as stepped forward. We're offering you a choice. Join us. Become keepers. Help us guide the transformation, or resist and become vessels like everyone else. Either way, the transformation happens. The only question is whether you're conscious for it." "That's not a choice," Pletishiapa said. "It's the only choice anyone gets," Ruth replied. "We've been managing the substance for over a century, keeping it controlled, but it's evolving, growing stronger. We can either guide it or be consumed by it. We chose guidance. By turning people into vessels, Neyo asked. By helping them transcend their limited human existence, the tall man corrected. The substance offers immortality, knowledge, power beyond imagining. Yes, it costs individuality. But what is individuality except isolation, loneliness, fear? The substance offers unity, connection, purpose. It offers slavery, Mercer said. Does it? Bobby stepped forward. I spent 40 years quantifying suffering for insurance companies. 40 years of looking at people's worst moments and putting dollar signs on them. The substance freed me from that, showed me that suffering is optional, that we're choosing separation when we could choose unity. He smiled and his eyes were completely black. Gizzard chose that moment to waddle out from behind the keepers, looking annoyed but unharmed. He trotted over to Neyo and sat on his foot, which was Gizzard's way of saying he forgave them for leaving him tied up, but expected extra food as compensation. Here's what's going to happen, the tall man said. At sunset tomorrow, the ritual completes. The source will spread beyond Plumville. It will reach other towns, other cities, eventually the whole world. Humanity will transform, become something greater, and you can either be part of guiding that transformation as keepers, or you can be transformed. Those are your options. There's a third option, a new voice said. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was a figure Neyo didn't recognize, a woman in her 60s with looked extremely put out by the entire situation. Who the hell are you? Ruth demanded. My name is Magnolia Whitehorse. I'm from Louisiana, and this is Ralph. She gestured to the parrot. Ralph is a channeling spirit. He speaks for the dead, and the dead have a lot to say about what you've been doing. Ralph the parrot fixed his beady eyes on the keepers and spoke in a voice that definitely didn't belong to a bird. You're all done messed up. And that's when things got really weird. End of Chapter 2. The Calcification, a novel. Chapter 1, the morning the sparrows turned to... Chapter 3, the choices we make in the dark. Choose you this day whom ye will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua 15, Ralph the parrot cocked his head, his beady eyes reflecting candlelight in a way that made them look almost human. When he spoke again, the voice that came out was different, older, raspier, with a thick Louisiana accent that somehow carried the weight of Spanish moss and funeral jazz. The dead remember, Ralph said, and every keeper in the room tensed. They remember October 1887. They remember the bricklayers, all 6 of them, who broke through into that chamber. And they remember what happened to the 7th man. The one you don't talk about, the one who refused. The tall Carpaneo had learned his name was Edmund. Went pale. That's not relevant. Oh, it's relevant, sugar, Magnolia said, stepping further into the courthouse. She moved like water, like someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating places where the veil between worlds was thin. Because that 7th man? He's the reason y'all are even able to contain this thing. He didn't touch the substance. Didn't accept its gifts, and when the other 6 transformed, he stayed human, stayed clean, and he learned something. What? Neyo asked. Ralph fluttered his wings. He learned that the substance can't take what isn't freely given. It can seduce, it can tempt, it can whisper promises, sweeter than honey dripped on a Georgia biscuit, but it can't force. Not at the beginning. Not until the transformation is complete. So the people eating the strawberries, Mercer began, are choosing, Magnolia finished. Maybe they don't know they're choosing. Maybe they think it's just fruit. But on some level, deep down, they're saying yes. And once you say yes, once you open that door even a crack, it floods in. Spencer stepped forward from the circle of keepers. That's why we became keepers. To help people say no, to manage the substance, to keep it from spreading. Except you're not managing it anymore, are you? Magnolia's eyes were hard. You're feeding it. The rituals, the ceremonies. You think you're in control, but you're just making it stronger. And Ralph here. Ralph's been talking to the original bricklayers. The ones who died trying to undo what they'd done. They have a message for you. Ralph ruffled his feathers, and when he spoke his voice multiplied 6 voices, speaking in unison. It can be killed. The source, it's not invincible. It just wants you to think it is. The courthouse erupted, keepers shouting, arguing, some advancing on Magnolia while others backed away. Edmund raised his hands for silence. Even if that's true, he said, voice strained, killing it would mean killing everyone who's already been transformed, everyone who's become a vessel, hundreds of people. You'd be committing mass murder. Or mass mercy, Magnolia said quietly. Depends on how you look at it. In the chaos that followed, Neyo felt a hand on his arm. It was Pletishiapa, and her face was set with a determination he'd only seen a few times in their marriage usually, right before she did something that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of their lives. I need to tell you something, she said, pulling him aside. Mercer followed. They huddled in a corner while the keepers and Magnolia argued. Gizzard sat between them, gnawing on what appeared to be a chunk of the courthouse's marble floor. I've been thinking, Pletishiapa said, about my father, about all the people who are changing, and I think— She stopped, took a breath. I think one of us needs to become a keeper. What? Neyo stared at her. Not to help them, to infiltrate, to learn how to make those vials Spencer gave us. To understand the rituals well enough to maybe sabotage them. We need someone on the inside. That's insane, Mercer said. You heard what Spencer said. The keepers perform rituals. They're complicit in all of this. I know, but we need information. And if one of us refuses outright, if one of us becomes a vessel, and if one of us becomes a keeper, we cover all the bases. We learn everything we can from every angle. Neyo felt something cold settle in his stomach. Who becomes what? Pletishiapa looked at Mercer. You refuse, you stay clean, you're our anchor, our proof that resistance is possible. Mercer nodded slowly. And I'll become a keeper, Pletishiapa continued. I'll learn their secrets. Which means I become a vessel, Neyo said quietly. Not fully, just enough. Enough to understand what it feels like, enough to know what we're fighting. But not so much that you can't come back. She gripped his hand. Spencer said the vials work for an hour. If we can figure out how to make more, we can keep pulling you back, keep you on the edge, conscious but connected. It was the worst plan Neyo had ever heard. It was also possibly the only one that made sense. I don't like this, he said. I know, I don't either. But my father is already changing, and if we don't do something, everyone we know will follow. This way, we have a chance. Before Neyo could respond, Edmund's voice cut through the courthouse. Enough! We've wasted enough time! You three! He pointed at Neyo, Pletishiapa, and Mercer. What's your decision? Join us as keepers, or leave and face the transformation? Pletishiapa stepped forward. I'll join you, the keepers murmured. Edmund looked surprised. You understand what that means? The rituals, the responsibilities, the marks? I understand. And you? Edmund looked at Mercer. I refuse, Mercer said, his deviated septum making the words sound even more defiant. I refuse the substance. I refuse your rituals. I refuse all of it. Edmund's expression hardened. Then you'll transform. Tomorrow night, when the ritual completes, you'll become a vessel whether you like it or not. Maybe, maybe not, but I'm not helping you. And you? Edmund's eyes fell on Neyo. Neyo thought about the stone sparrow, about the trees with hair and mouths, about Mr. Chen's darkening eyes, about everything that had led to this moment. I want to understand it, he said slowly. The substance, what it offers, what it costs, I'll take it willingly, but not all the way, not yet. I want to walk the edge. Edmund smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. That's not how it works. You can't bargain with the source. Then I'll try anyway. The choice was made. The die was cast. The metaphors were mixing in ways that suggested reality itself was becoming unreliable. What happened next happened quickly. Pletishiapa was led away by 3 of the keepers, including Ruth, who gave Neyo a look that might have been sympathy or might have been satisfaction. It was hard to tell. Mercer was escorted out of the courthouse with warnings that he had until sunset tomorrow to reconsider his foolishness. And Neyo was taken down a flight of stairs he hadn't noticed before, into a basement that smelled like earth and copper and something sweetly rotten. In the center of the basement was a vat, large, brass-rimmed, filled with a liquid that shifted colors in the candlelight. The substance. The source. The thing that had been sleeping under Plumville for who knew how long. "One taste," Edmund said. "Just one, and you'll understand everything." Neyo approached the vat. The liquid inside seemed to pulse, to breathe. He could feel it calling to him, promising things he didn't have names for. He thought about Pletishiapa, about the plan, about staying on the edge. He dipped his finger in the liquid. It was warm, almost hot. And when he brought it to his lips, when he tasted it, the world inverted. Everything he'd ever known about reality was suddenly revealed to be a child's understanding. The substance showed him not in words, but in pure comprehension what it really was. Not evil, not good, just hungry, just alive, just seeking to grow, to spread, to encompass. And it showed him what it offered, an end to loneliness. An end to fear, an end to the terrible isolation of being a single consciousness trapped in a single body. For a moment, just a moment, Neyo wanted to say yes. Wanted to dive into the vat and let it fill him completely. Wanted to become something greater than himself. Then he thought about Pletishiapa organizing her spices in reverse alphabetical order. About her inexplicable fear of ceiling fans. About the way she laughed at jokes 3 seconds too late. He pulled back from the vat. "Enough," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Edmund was watching him with interest. "Most people don't stop at one taste." "I'm not most people. No, you're not." Edmund studied him. "Your eyes are changing, just slightly. You'll feel it working through you over the next few hours. The whispers, the promises, the pull. If you can resist until sunrise, you might actually be able to walk that edge you talked about. But I doubt it. The substance is patient, but it's also persuasive. They let him leave." He stumbled up the stairs, out of the courthouse, into the night air that now smelled different, sharper, more complex, full of scents he'd never noticed before. Mercer was waiting by the car. He took one look at Neyo's face and cursed. "How bad? I don't know yet." They drove in silence. Neyo could feel the substance moving through him, mapping his neurons, learning his thoughts. It wasn't painful. That was the worst part. It felt good. It felt like coming home. When they got back to the compound, Spencer was on his porch. He stood when he saw Neyo. "You tasted it," Spencer said. "Not a question." "Yeah, how much?" "1 drop." Spencer looked relieved. "That's manageable. Maybe. Come inside. I'll show you how to make the vials. It won't be enough to cure you, but it'll slow the transformation. Give you time." Inside Spencer's Bejan Chartreuse nightmare, he showed Neyo and Mercer the process. A mixture of bathwater from before dawn, salt harvested during a new moon, and something Spencer called ash of refusal, the burned remains of things that had been offered to the substance and rejected. "It's not science," Spencer said. "It's something else, something the 7th bricklayer figured out, the one who refused. He spent his whole life developing these countermeasures, and we keepers have been using them to stay in control, to keep from being fully consumed." "So you're all on the edge too," Mercer said. "Some of us. Others have gone further. Bobby, Ruth, they're true believers now. They want the transformation to happen. They think it's evolution. And you?" Spencer looked tired. "Old. I think we made a mistake in 1887, and we've been compounding it ever since. But I don't know how to fix it without destroying everything." Neyo's phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. A photo. It showed Pletishiapa in a room he'd never seen before, her arm being marked with symbols while she stared straight ahead with an expression of grim determination. Below the image, "She's one of us now. Tomorrow she performs her first ritual. You should be proud." "They work fast," Mercer said, looking over Neyo's shoulder. Another text, different number. This one from Pletishiapa herself. "I'm okay. Learning things. Will tell you everything when I can. Stay strong. I love you." Neyo wanted to respond, but Spencer shook his head. "They'll be monitoring her communications. Anything you say could compromise her." The night stretched on. Neyo could feel the substance working through him, and he started to understand why people gave in. The whispers weren't threatening, they were seductive. They promised an end to uncertainty, an end to doubt, an end to the exhausting work of being an individual. Around 3 a.m. the hallucinations started. He saw the courthouse basement, but from a different angle from inside the vat, looking up. He saw people he didn't recognize drinking from the substance. He saw the original 6 bricklayers, their eyes black as oil, performing the first ritual. He saw Table floating in the grain silo, smiling as the liquid filled her lungs. And he saw something else. Something the substance didn't want him to see but couldn't quite hide. A memory of before Plumville, before the courthouse, before humans. The substance had been somewhere else first. Somewhere cold and deep and far from light, and it had been waiting, just waiting, for something warm-blooded and curious to find it. "It's not from here," Neyo said aloud, and both Mercer and Spencer looked at him. "It's not from Earth, or if it is, it's from so deep inside that it might as well be alien," Spencer nodded slowly. "The 7th bricklayer thought the same thing. He believed it fell from the sky millions of years ago, buried itself in the bedrock, and waited, just waited for us to dig deep enough. Can it be killed?" "Magnolia thinks so. The dead told her there's a way. But it requires—" Spencer hesitated. "It requires someone who's touched the substance but hasn't fully transformed, someone who can walk into the source and poison it, essentially. Introduce something it can't metabolize." "What?" "Absolute refusal. Complete rejection, not just of the substance, but of everything it represents. Unity, connection, belonging. You'd have to be willing to embrace total isolation, total loneliness, total separation from everything and everyone." Spencer looked at Neyo. "The 7th bricklayer tried. He failed. It drove him insane. He spent his last years in an asylum, screaming about rainbows and how they were lies, how every color was actually alone, how the spectrum was propaganda for connection that didn't really exist." Mercer was pacing. "So our options are, let everyone become vessels or drive someone insane trying to poison the source. Or become keepers and manage it," Spencer added. "Like we've been doing." "Except you're not managing it anymore," Neyo said, echoing Magnolia's words. "It's managing you," Spencer didn't argue. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky the colors of a bruise. Neyo watched it through Spencer's window and tried to remember what color had looked like before he'd tasted the substance. Everything seemed more vivid now, more intense, but also somehow hollow, as if beauty itself was just another trap. His phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "Hello?" Neyo Blackstrap. The voice was Table's, but layered with dozens of others. "You're resisting. We can feel it. The source is disappointed." "Good. But also impressed. You're stronger than most. That's why we want you, need you. The transformation is incomplete without willing participants who understand what they're choosing." "I'm not choosing you." "Not yet. But you will. By sunset tonight, when the ritual completes, you'll feel the pull. Everyone will. Even those who've refused. Even Mercer. Even the 7th bricklayer, if he was still alive. The difference is, most people will give in. Will join us. Will become one with the source. You could be a leader in the new world. You could guide the transformation. Or you could be just another vessel, conscious but powerless. Or I could stop it. Table or the thing wearing table laughed. With what? The vials? They're temporary. The refusal. It's never worked. The source is patient. The source is inevitable. The source is already inside you, learning you, becoming you. By sunset, you won't even remember why you were resisting. The line went dead. Neyo looked at Mercer and Spencer. We need to find Magnolia. We need to hear what the dead know. All of it. They found her at the interim. The small bar in the alley where Neyo had first discovered the stone sparrow witch felt like years ago, but had only been 2 days. The bar was empty except for Magnolia and Ralph, who was perched on a brass rail, preening. Wondered when Yor would show up. Magnolia said, nursing what looked like whiskey at 7 a.m. They sat. Neyo noticed that the bartender, a grizzled man with a yellow t-shirt that read, "I survived Plumville so far," was studiously ignoring them. The dead told me something else, Magnolia said without preamble. About the ritual tonight. It's not just about spreading the substance. It's about anchoring it, making it permanent. Right now it can still be disrupted, still be poisoned, still be killed. But after sunset, after the ritual completes, it becomes part of the town's foundation. Literally, it merges with the bedrock, with the water table, with everything, and then it's unkillable. So we have until sunset, Mercer said. Less than that. The ritual starts at 4 p.m. Takes 4 hours. You've got, she checked her watch, 9 hours. To do what? To make a choice. Magnolia drained her whiskey. Ralph's been channeling the 7th bricklayer. His name was Josiah Whitehorse. My great-great-grandfather. He failed to poison the source because he tried to do it alone, because he thought isolation was strength. But the dead are telling me that's wrong. You don't beat the source by refusing connection. You beat it by choosing the right connections. By holding on to the people and things that matter even when the substance promises you something easier. She looked directly at Neyo. You tasted it. You're connected to it now. But you're also connected to your wife, to Mercer, to Gizzard, to your memories and choices and all the messy, complicated, painful things that make you human. The source can't metabolize that, can't digest it. It wants unity, but it can only offer uniformity. True connection, the kind that includes disagreement and conflict, and difference that's poison to it. So what do I do? You walk into that vat tonight, during the ritual, and you hold on to everything the substance wants you to forget. Every argument you've had with Pletishiapa, every time Mercer annoyed you, every moment of doubt and fear and loneliness. You make yourself indigestible. And then what? Then the source tries to transform you, can't, and tears itself apart trying. At least, that's the theory. Josiah thought it would work, but he couldn't do it. He was too angry, too rigid. He refused connection entirely, which just made him easier for the substance to isolate and consume. Ralph spoke in his own voice this time. You gotta love the mess, sugar. That's the secret. Love the mess. The day crawled forward. Neyo could feel the substance growing stronger in him, could feel his thoughts beginning to synchronize with something larger. He took one of Spencer's vial's 3 drops under his tongue and felt the connection break, but only partially. Only temporarily. Around noon, his phone rang. Pletishiapa. I can't talk long, she said, voice tight. They're watching, but I learned something. The ritual, it requires 12 keepers, but it also requires 12 vessels, volunteers, people who've tasted the substance and chosen to fully transform. They're gathering them now. Are you okay? I'm marked. It hurts. But I'm learning the rituals. Neyo, there's something they're not telling the other keepers. The transformation isn't permanent for everyone. Only for those who perform the ritual. The keepers are locking themselves in, making themselves irreversibly connected to the source. The others, the vessels, they can still be saved. Still be pulled back. How? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Just whatever happens tonight, know that I'm trying. Know that I love you. Know that if I have to perform a ritual to learn how to undo them all, I will. Pletishiapa. I have to go. Sunset. Be ready. The line went dead. Neyo sat with Mercer and Spencer and Magnolia in that Baijan Chartreuse living room, surrounded by the detritus of Spencer's Life the Graceland model, the broken stained glass, the waterbed that nobody sat on because disturbing sloshing sounds. On the television, closed captions scrolled across a muted news broadcast about a rat terrier that had somehow become mayor of a small town in Idaho, which seemed quaint compared to Plumville's problems. "I've been thinking about something," Mercer said suddenly, "about late 80s teen pop music groups and their effect on culture as a whole. Stay with me here because I think it's relevant. You had groups like New Kids on the Block, Debbie Gibson, Tiffany. These manufactured pop acts that were designed to create parasocial relationships with their fans. The whole business model was based on selling the illusion of connection. You buy the album, the poster, the concert ticket, and you feel like you know these people, like you're part of something bigger than yourself, but it was always a transaction disguised as intimacy. The substance is the same thing. It's selling you connection, but what you're really getting is consumption. You're not joining something. You're being processed." The pop groups at least were honest about being a product. The substance pretends it's offering transcendence when really, it's just the ultimate MLM scheme multi-level transformation. And just like those teen pop fans who grew up and realized they'd been sold a fantasy, anyone who transforms is eventually going to realize they've been absorbed into something that never actually cared about them as individuals. Except by then it'll be too late, because they won't be individuals anymore. Everyone stared at him. "That was weirdly insightful," Spencer said. "I have depth," Mercer replied, his deviated septum adding gravitas to the statement. Around 2 p.m. things started happening outside. People walking toward the courthouse. Dozens of them, all with darkening eyes, all answering the call. Neyo watched from the window and felt the pull himself. The substance wanted him to join them, wanted him to complete his transformation, wanted him to stop fighting. He took another vial. 3 drops. The pull lessened, but didn't disappear. "It's almost time," Magnolia said. "You'll need to decide. Are you doing this?" Neyo thought about everything he'd learned, about the choices they'd made, about Pletishiapa being marked and initiated, about Mercer refusing and facing transformation anyway, about himself caught between 2 states, neither fully human nor fully vessel. He thought about the stone sparrow, about trees growing hair and mouths, about his father-in-law's eyes darkening, about Table floating in that liquid, smiling. He thought about the 7th bricklayer, Josiah Whitehorse, who tried to fight the substance through isolation and had failed. And he thought about what Magnolia had said. You don't beat it by refusing connection. You beat it by choosing the right connections. "I'm doing it," Neyo said. "I'm going into the vat, during the ritual, and I'm going to hold on to everything that makes me human, everything messy and painful and complicated, and I'm going to poison that thing from the inside." "I'm coming with you," Mercer said. "No, you're the anchor. Remember, you stay clean. You're our proof that resistance is possible." "Then I'm coming," Spencer said. "I've been a keeper for 20 years. I know the rituals. I can disrupt them from inside." Magnolia nodded. "Ralph and I will handle the perimeter. Make sure none of the other keepers interfere." They had a plan. It was barely a plan. It was more like a series of desperate gestures strung together with hope and stubbornness. But it was all they had. At 3:45 p.m. they left the compound and headed toward the courthouse. The town had transformed. Not just the people, the landscape itself. Hair grew from every tree, long and lustrous and moving in wind that didn't exist. Mouths opened in bark and whistled harmonies that sounded like hymns sung backwards. And everywhere, grapes. Huge, purple grapes growing from lampposts, from mailboxes, from the sides of buildings, clustering in places grapes had no business being. "That's new," Mercer said. "The substance is manifesting," Spencer explained. "Taking physical form beyond the silo, it's preparing for the final transformation." They reached the courthouse at 3:55 a.m. The doors were open. Inside, candles burned. The 12 keepers stood in a circle around the vat, including Pletishiapa, her arm freshly marked, her face a mask of determination. In the center of the circle, 12 people knelt. The volunteers. The ones who'd chosen to fully transform. Neyo recognized some of them. Mr. Chen, Pletishiapa's father, his eyes now completely black. A woman from the grocery store, a teenager who worked at the library, and sitting in the corner, looking confused and out of place, was Gizzard. Edmund stood at the head of the circle. He saw Neyo and smiled. "Come to join us after all?" in a manner of speaking. The ritual began at exactly 4 p.m. The keepers started chanting in a language that wasn't quite language, syllables that bypassed the ears and went straight to the brainstem. The volunteers began to sway. The vat bubbled and steamed. Neyo walked forward. He could feel the substance calling him, promising him, seducing him. He thought about Pletishiapa, about their first date, which had been terrible. They'd gone to see a movie that turned out to be 3 hours of French agricultural policy, and they'd both been too polite to leave. He thought about Mercer and his deviated septum and his weird theories about musicals. He thought about Gizzard trying to eat his own tail. He reached the vat. "Wait," Edmund said, breaking the chant. "You'll disrupt the ritual." "I know," Neyo said and jumped in. The liquid enveloped him, hot and thick and alive. It rushed into his mouth, his nose, his ears. It filled him completely, and it started to transform him. But Neyo held on. He held on to every petty argument, every moment of doubt, every time he'd felt alone, even when surrounded by people. He held on to his fear of ceiling fans, which he'd absorbed from Pletishiapa. He held on to the memory of burning his hand on the bakery oven and crying in the bathroom because he didn't want anyone to see. He held on to his shame about his name, about his parents' hippie past, about every awkward moment of his existence. The substance tried to smooth it all away, tried to make him perfect, tried to offer him unity, and Neyo refused, not by pushing it away, but by holding on to the mess. By insisting on his right to be complicated and contradictory and human. The vat began to shake. Pletishiapa broke from the circle. She grabbed a straight razor from her robe, one of the ritual implements, and slashed her own marked arm. Blood fell into the vat. "I refuse the marks," she screamed. "I refuse the transformation. I choose him. I choose the mess." The other keepers tried to stop her, but Mercer had entered the courthouse with Magnolia. Ralph flew at Edmund's face, talons out, screaming in multiple voices. Magnolia was drawing symbols on the floor with something that looked like ash. Spencer grabbed Ruthhood, started toward Pletishiapa, and slammed her into the wall. "It's over," he said. "We've been lying to ourselves for over a century. It ends now." The vat cracked. The substance inside churned and roiled. Neyo felt it trying to digest him, trying to process his messy humanity, and failing catastrophically. The crack widened. The substance began to leak out, but it was different now, not liquid, but something closer to smoke, dispersing, dissolving. The 12 volunteers collapsed. Their eyes cleared. Mr. Chen gasped, looked around, started crying with relief. The keeper's marks began to fade, burning away like paper in reverse. And Neyo climbed out of the vat, coughing up substance that evaporated before it hit the floor. "What did you do?" Edmund demanded, his own marks smoking on his skin. "I stayed human," Neyo said. "I stayed messy, and it couldn't handle that." The courthouse began to shake. The substance in the vat was evaporating, but it wasn't gone. It was returning to the source, to the chamber beneath the building, and it was dying, actually dying. "We need to leave," Spencer said. "When it dies completely, the chamber will collapse. The whole courthouse might come down." They ran, all of them, keepers and would-be vessels, and Neyo and Pletishiapa and Mercer and Magnolia and Ralph and Gizzard, who'd been quietly gnawing on a piece of the vat the entire time. They made it outside just as the courthouse's foundation gave way. The building didn't collapse dramatically, it sank. Slowly, deliberately, as if the earth beneath it had decided it no longer wanted to support such weight. And as it sank, the trees stopped whistling. The hair began to fall away. The grapes shriveled and dropped. The substance was dying. Not completely, not yet. But it was dying. They stood in the street, watching the courthouse disappear into the ground, and nobody spoke. Because what was there to say? Finally, Ruth, former keeper, former true believer, said, "What now?" "Now," Magnolia said. "You'll clean up the mess, figure out how to help the people who were partially transformed, rebuild trust, start over," and maybe she looked at Neyo. "Maybe you'll remember that being human means being complicated, means holding on to the difficult parts, means choosing connection without demanding perfection." Neyo looked at Pletishiapa. Her arm was bleeding, the marks fading but leaving scars. She looked exhausted, traumatized, angry, beautiful. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what? For jumping into a vat of supernatural liquid without discussing it with you first." She laughed. It came late, as always. "Yeah, we're going to need therapy. So much therapy. Can we afford it?" "I just made $50,000 on Etsy. We can afford it." They held each other while the sun set on Plumville, a real sunset, natural and ordinary and free of ritual significance. And somewhere in the ruins of the courthouse, in the collapsed chamber beneath, the last of the substance evaporated into nothing, leaving only echoes and scars and memories of October 1887. But the story wasn't quite over. Because that night, after they'd gone home, after they'd showered off the residue of the substance and tried to process what had happened, Neyo's phone rang one final time. "Unknown number." He answered, expecting Table's layered voice, expecting threats or promises or warnings. Instead, he heard static, and beneath the static, very faint, a voice he didn't recognize. "Thank you. We can rest now." The 7 bricklayers. The original keepers. The men who'd spent over a century trapped between human and vessel, unable to die, unable to live. They were free now. They were dead, properly dead, and they could finally rest. Neyo hung up and looked at Pletishiapa, who was feeding Gizzard from a bag of strawberries, normal ones, from the grocery store, verified non-supernatural. "It's over," he said. "For now," she replied, and she was right. Because in the ruins of the courthouse, in the collapsed chamber, something small had survived. A seed, a spore, a possibility. The substance wasn't completely dead, just dormant, just waiting. But that's a story for another time. For now, in this moment, Plumville was free. The accord would be dissolved. The secrets would be revealed. The healing would begin. And Neyo Blackstrap Baker, husband, former vessel, survivor, went to bed beside his wife and slept without dreams, which was itself a minor miracle. Outside, a single tree still had a strand of human hair hanging from one branch. And as the wind blew, it almost sounded like whistling. Almost, but not quite. End of chapter 3.